I am Dorothy Jenkins, 63 years old, and somehow still carrying the weight of being too generous to my own family. As a retired nurse who worked double shifts at Grady Hospital for 35 years, I thought I had earned some peace in my golden years. But my son David and his wife Keisha had other plans for my retirement savings. Last Sunday morning they called asking me to join them for brunch at the Peach Diner in Buckhead to celebrate David's new marketing contract. Between bottomless mimosas and shrimp and grits, my daughter-in-law Keisha leaned forward with that familiar smirk I should have recognized as trouble. "You know, Miss Dorothy, that old lady just good for paying our bills anyway." She said it loud enough for her Delta Sigma Theta sorority sisters to hear, and they all erupted in laughter. My own son David nearly choked on his chicken and waffles from laughing so hard at his mama's expense. I simply sipped my sweet tea and smiled. That night, I logged into every bank account, disabled every credit card they had access to, and changed passwords they had been using for 9 long years. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who treated your generosity like an endless ATM. Growing up in Southwest Atlanta meant community and family loyalty ran deep in our blood. But inside my modest 3-bedroom ranch house on Campbellton Road, financial manipulation had become a way of life. My living room with its cream-colored walls covered in family photos, and my late husband Marcus's military honors had become ground zero for every sob story and emergency that required my immediate financial rescue. From the day Marcus passed from that heart attack 7 years ago, I maintained perfect credit and a spotless savings account, thinking I was securing a legacy for future generations. David would call with that trembling voice that always preceded expensive requests. "Mama, I hate to ask, but we in a real bind this month." Whether it was 7 months of $1 or $100 rent payments when he lost his job, or $2,500 for Keisha's professional wardrobe for her beauty blog, or $4,800 for their Miami anniversary trip while I ate ramen noodles alone. My checking account became their personal emergency fund. My credit cards became their shopping spree tickets. My retirement savings became their vacation fund. Every time I hesitated, every time I suggested maybe they should budget better or find additional income, the guilt would start flowing like sweet molasses. "Mama, family's supposed to help family. You know Daddy would want you to take care of us." Using Marcus's memory to manipulate me into emptying my pockets became their favorite tactic. The breaking point came 2 months ago when they needed $17,000 for a down payment on a pearl white Lexus. "We trying for a baby, Miss Dorothy," Keisha explained with those crocodile tears. "Need something safe and reliable for our growing family." I cleaned out nearly 3 years of retirement savings for that car payment, believing I was investing in my future grandchildren's safety. But yesterday morning at that brunch hearing, Keisha reduced me to nothing more than a bill-paying machine in front of her friends. Something inside my spirit shifted permanently. For 9 years I had been their financial salvation during every crisis, real or manufactured. I paid their rent when David claimed job searching was too stressful. I funded Keisha's Instagram-worthy lifestyle while I wore the same church dresses from 2015. I financed their romantic getaways to beaches I would never see again. That night I couldn't sleep from the clarity burning in my chest. At exactly 3 a.m., I got up and began making decisions that would change everything. First, I canceled all 6 additional credit cards they had been using like their personal shopping fund. Every single one of the cards David and Keisha treated as if they were born with them in their wallets. The Chase Freedom card they maxed out on furniture for their apartment. The Nordstrom card Keisha used for her weekly hauls she posted on Instagram. The American Express I gave them for emergencies only, that somehow paid for date nights at steakhouses I could never afford for myself. Click, click, click. Each cancellation felt like removing chains I didn't even realize were wrapped around my ankles. Then I closed that shared savings account where I had been depositing $400 every month like clockwork for what they called family emergencies. Emergencies that mysteriously always looked like concert tickets, weekend trips to Savannah, or brand-name groceries from Whole Foods while I shopped at Aldi with coupons clipped from the Sunday paper. I changed every single password on every account they had access to. My Bank of America login they used to check my balance before asking for money. My retirement account they monitored like stock traders watching the market. Even my PayPal and Venmo accounts they used for quick transfers that never got paid back. As I dug deeper into my online banking statements, I discovered charges I had never noticed before, monthly subscriptions draining my account in $15 and $25 increments, premium Spotify so Keisha could listen to music without ads, Netflix upgrades for 4K streaming, Planet Fitness memberships for both of them at $25 each per month, DoorDash premium so they could get free delivery on meals that cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget. They had been slowly bleeding me dry with death by 1,000 cuts, small charges I never bothered to question because I trusted my own family not to steal from me. The most painful discovery was a $200 monthly charge to something called Style Box Premium. When I Googled it, I found out it was a luxury clothing subscription service that shipped designer outfits to your door every month. Keisha had been getting a personal styling service delivered to her doorstep using my credit card for over a year. That's $200 and $400 in clothes I never saw her wear, paid for with money I earned wiping down hospital floors during double shifts. By 6 a.m., when the sun was rising over Atlanta and the birds were singing outside my kitchen window, I had built an impenetrable fortress around my finances. For the first time in 9 years, every dollar in my accounts belonged to me and me alone. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat in my favorite recliner that Marcus bought me for our 20th anniversary, and felt something I had not experienced in nearly a decade: complete and total peace. No anxiety about unexpected phone calls asking for money, no guilt about saying no to the next manufactured crisis, no wondering if I would have enough left in my retirement to keep my lights on. I knew that phone would start ringing soon, with desperate voices demanding explanations, and for the first time in years, I was ready to give them exactly what they deserved to hear. The phone rang at exactly 9:20 in the morning. I was sitting in my kitchen enjoying my second cup of coffee when I saw David's name lighting up my iPhone screen. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring 3 more times while I savored a moment of power I hadn't felt in almost a decade. When I finally swiped to answer, his voice was desperate, almost panicked. "Mama, why are all the cards declined? I'm here at the Peach Diner with Keisha and Gloria celebrating her birthday, but none of the cards are working. It's embarrassing as hell. People are staring at us like we're broke. The server keeps coming back asking if we want to try a different card, and I don't have enough cash in my wallet to cover a $170 brunch bill. What's going on with the bank?" The irony was absolutely delicious. They had chosen the Peach Diner, the most expensive brunch spot in Buckhead, to impress Gloria and show off for her church friends. The same upscale restaurant I had never been invited to, despite paying for their family brunches, there dozens of times over the years when they went without their mama. Now they were sitting there surrounded by Atlanta's Sunday brunch crowd they so desperately wanted to impress, and they couldn't even afford to pay for mimosas and chicken and waffles. "Good morning, David," I replied with a calmness that surprised even me. "The cards are canceled because I've decided I'm no longer going to finance y'all lifestyle." "What, are you serious right now? We're in public, Mama. Gloria is sitting right here with her friends from Mount Carmel Baptist. How am I supposed to explain that my own mama left us hanging at a restaurant? This is ridiculous, and you know it." "What's ridiculous, son, was hearing you laugh yesterday when your wife said I was only good for paying bills. What's ridiculous is realizing that for 9 years I've been treated like a walking ATM instead of your mother who deserves respect." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could hear voices in the background, probably Keisha and Gloria, wondering what was happening with their fancy brunch. The server must have been standing there with that forced smile they use when they know there's about to be a problem with the check. "Mama, please don't do this right now. We can sit down and talk about everything later like adults, but I need you to call the bank and reactivate these cards. Just for today, I promise we can work this whole thing out." I cut him off before he could finish that familiar song and dance. "No more promises, David. No more just for today. For 9 long years, I've heard the exact same promises. For 9 years, I've been your easy solution for every problem instead of y'all learning how to handle your own business like grown folks. That's not true, and you know it. Of course we love and appreciate you. Keisha was just joking around with her girls yesterday. You know how she gets when she's showing off. Don't take it so personal. I know exactly how she gets David, and I know exactly how you get too. That's why I made this decision while y'all were sleeping off those expensive cocktails I paid for. I could hear him breathing heavy into the phone. I imagined the situation at the restaurant was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. Gloria had probably figured out something was seriously wrong when her son-in-law's platinum card got declined. The same card he always used to flex and show how well he was doing financially. Mama, please have some mercy here. We can't just sit here looking stupid. What do you want us to do? Wash dishes in the kitchen. Should we call the police and report our cards stolen? This is straight-up humiliation. Now you know how I felt for all these years, I replied without hesitation. The difference is, you're 34 years old and should be able to solve your own problems without calling your mama every time something costs money. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Are you feeling sick or something? This isn't like you, Mama. You've never been this cold and cruel to your own family. Cruel. That word hit me like a physical slap across my face. I was being called cruel after years of working overtime shifts to pay their bills, cruel after sacrificing my own comfort so they could live above their means, cruel after being left alone every holiday while they traveled on vacations I financed but wasn't invited to join. Cruel was laughing at me yesterday, I said with an ice-cold tone I didn't know I possessed. Cruel was treating me like I was invisible for years, except when you needed money transferred to your account. Cruel was making me feel like my only value as a mother was the size of my bank balance. Look, Mama, Keisha explained what happened yesterday, and you're right to feel upset about it. But declining all the cards doesn't solve anything. It just makes things worse for everybody involved. For everybody. Not for me, of course. For them. For their comfort, their reputation, their ability to keep pretending they were financially successful. My emotional well-being still wasn't part of their equation, even in the middle of this crisis. I heard louder voices in the background, Keisha asking what was taking so long, Gloria making comments I couldn't quite make out, but that sounded increasingly annoyed. Other diners probably starting to notice the drama unfolding at their table. Please, Mama, we can fix this situation. We can change how we do things. But right now, I need you to help us out. Just this one last time, and then we can sit down and renegotiate everything. Just this one last time. I actually laughed out loud, and my own laughter sounded bitter and strange even to me. Do you know how many last times I've heard over the years? Do you know how many final emergencies I've paid for that turned into next month's crisis? But Mama, how are we going to explain to Gloria that my own mother abandoned us at a restaurant? How am I going to face people who know our family? Everybody's going to be talking about this at church. And there it was, the naked truth I had been waiting to hear. He wasn't worried about fixing our relationship or reflecting on how they had treated me for years. He was only concerned about his image, his reputation, what the church folks and social media would say about his mama cutting him off financially. That's your problem to figure out, son. For years I worried about your image, your comfort, your happiness, your financial stability. Now it's time for me to worry about my own dignity and peace of mind. You can't do this to us. You're my mother. Exactly. I'm your mother, not your personal banker. I'm your mother, not your emergency fund. I'm your mother, not your backup plan when your own money runs out. And as your mother, I should have taught you years ago how to stand on your own 2 feet and pay your own bills like every other adult in America. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or regret. They were trembling with pure adrenaline, with a sense of power and self-respect I hadn't experienced in nearly a decade. For the first time in 9 years, I had put my own needs and boundaries first. For the first time in 9 years, I had said no and meant it. For the next 30 minutes, my phone did not stop buzzing. First, it was David calling back 3 more times in a row. Then Keisha, her voice high-pitched and frantic. Then a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed belonged to Gloria, trying to figure out what kind of family drama she had gotten caught up in during what was supposed to be a peaceful birthday brunch. Every call I sent straight to voicemail gave me more strength, more conviction that I was finally doing the right thing after years of being a pushover. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat on my back porch, enjoying the silence and watching the cardinals visit the bird feeder I had installed last spring with my own money for my own enjoyment. But the peace didn't last nearly long enough. At exactly 11:30 in the morning, I heard the unmistakable sound of David's Lexus pulling into my driveway. The same car I had helped finance with that $17,000 down payment just 2 months ago. 2 doors slammed shut with enough force to rattle my front windows, and I heard urgent footsteps marching up my walkway like soldiers heading into battle. The knocking started immediately, loud and aggressive and demanding. "Mama, open this door right now, we need to talk." David's voice sounded different now, more desperate, but also more aggressive than I had heard in years. "I know you're in there. Your Honda is parked right in the driveway and the TV is on. Stop playing games and come talk to us like an adult." I didn't budge from my position on the back porch, invisible from the front entrance, continuing to watch those beautiful red birds eat the sunflower seeds I had bought them. It was funny how small pleasures in life took on new meaning when you finally had the mental space and peace of mind to actually enjoy them. "Dorothy." Now it was Keisha's voice, sharp and demanding, and completely different from the sweet tone she used when she wanted something expensive. "We know you're in there hiding like a child. Stop acting stupid and come face us so we can work this mess out. Face them as if I was the one who had done something wrong, as if I was the one who owed anybody an explanation after 9 years of financial abuse disguised as family love." The knocking got louder and more insistent. I could tell they were using their fists and probably their feet too, treating my solid oak front door like it was the entrance to some nightclub they were trying to get into. My front door that Marcus had installed himself with so much pride and care was being assaulted like I was holding them hostage inside my own house. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Keisha shouted loud enough for my neighbors to hear every word. "You made us look like straight fools in front of everybody at that restaurant. Gloria had to pull out her own credit card and pay our bill like we were some kind of charity case. A 65-year-old woman had to rescue us because you decided to have some kind of mental breakdown." So that's what happened after I hung up the phone. Gloria had to save the day and cover their expensive brunch bill. I could picture the whole embarrassing scene perfectly. David sweating bullets as he tried different cards that all got declined. Keisha making up ridiculous excuses about technical problems with the bank. Other customers at nearby tables starting to stare and whisper. The server getting impatient and probably calling over the manager. And finally, Gloria, bless her heart, having to open her purse and rescue 2 grown adults who couldn't pay for their own food. The humiliation must have been absolutely delicious to witness. "Mama, please." David's voice cracked like he was about to start crying. "People at the restaurant were taking pictures with their phones. This is probably already posted on somebody's Instagram story by now. Everybody's going to be talking about this at church on Sunday. Please don't do this to our family reputation." Our family reputation, not our actual family relationship, not the hurt feelings or damaged trust or years of taking me for granted, just the reputation and what people would think and say about them on social media and at Mount Carmel Baptist. The knocking stopped for a few minutes, but I could hear their voices through my front door arguing in angry whispers. They were probably trying to figure out their next strategy, their next angle of attack. I knew Keisha well enough after all these years to know she had a whole arsenal of emotional manipulation tactics, and David had learned every single one of them from watching her work. "Dorothy," Keisha's voice changed completely, becoming soft and sweet again, like she was talking to a scared child. "Look, I know you're upset and hurt, and honestly, you have every right to feel that way. Maybe what I said yesterday at brunch came out sounding worse than I meant it, but I was just playing around with my sorors. You know how we women get when we're together talking mess and not really meaning half of what comes out our mouths." It was fascinating to listen to how she could completely transform her personality within seconds. From the furious woman who had been screaming and kicking my door just minutes earlier, she had somehow morphed into the understanding daughter-in-law who had simply made a tiny communication error that got blown out of proportion. "Mama," David jumped in with the same gentle, reasonable tone. I talked to Keisha about what happened yesterday, and she explained the whole situation to me. You're absolutely right to be upset with us, but canceling all the credit cards doesn't solve anything. It just creates bigger problems for everybody in this family. For everybody in the family. Still not acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, the biggest problem was how they had been treating me for years, like I was their personal bank instead of a human being with feelings and financial limits. Please, Mama, we can change things. We can sit down and have a real conversation about boundaries and expectations. But I need you to call the bank today and get these cards working again. I got bills due this week. The car insurance payment is due tomorrow, and Keisha has doctor appointments she can't miss. Bills due, car insurance, doctor appointments. Everything was still my responsibility to solve, even in the middle of them apologizing for treating me like a financial resource instead of their mother. The pounding on my door continued for another 20 minutes before they finally gave up and drove away. But I knew this was far from over. I knew Keisha well enough to understand she was already planning her next move, probably something more elaborate and emotionally manipulative than screaming through my front door like teenagers having a tantrum. I wasn't wrong. At exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, my house phone started ringing with unfamiliar numbers from area codes I didn't recognize. First, it was Gloria, her voice polite but firm, with that church lady authority she was known for throughout Mount Carmel Baptist. "Dorothy, honey, I think there's been some kind of serious misunderstanding here. Keisha explained to me what happened yesterday, and I'm sure we can resolve this situation like Christian women who love their family. You know, I've always respected you as David's mama, but this seems a little extreme over some harmless girl talk." I hung up without saying a single word. Then it was my sister Lorraine calling from Detroit, her voice filled with worry and confusion because she had obviously received a heavily edited version of recent events. "Dorothy, David called me sounding absolutely desperate. He says you're acting strange and that you left them stranded at some restaurant without any warning. Are you feeling okay, sister? Are you having health problems you haven't told me about? This doesn't sound like the Dorothy. I know who would give her last dollar to help family." "I'm feeling better than I've felt in years, Lorraine," I replied calmly. "Better than I've felt since Marcus passed, if I'm being completely honest. But I don't understand what's happening down there. David says you canceled all their credit cards without any discussion. That doesn't sound like the generous woman who raised that boy by herself after his daddy left." Maybe that was exactly the problem, I thought to myself. Maybe I had been too generous for too long, allowing grown adults to depend on me like children, instead of learning to stand on their own feet. "Lorraine, have you ever felt like a human ATM for your kids?" I asked her directly. "What kind of question is that?" "No, but what does that have to do with anything?" "Because that's exactly what I've been to David and Keisha for 9 years. And yesterday I finally realized it when she called me nothing more than a bill-paying machine in front of her friends." Lorraine was quiet for a moment, processing what I had just told her. "Well, maybe they have taken advantage of your kindness a little bit over the years, but cutting off all financial support without warning seems very harsh. You know, parents are supposed to help their children when they're struggling. Is it normal to pay your adult son's rent for months at a time? Is it normal to finance their vacations while you eat frozen dinners alone? Is it normal for them to make jokes about your generosity instead of showing gratitude?" After that conversation, I decided to unplug my house phone completely and put my cell phone on silent mode. I needed mental silence to process everything I was feeling and to plan my next steps without constant interruption from people who wanted to guilt me back into my old patterns. The calls kept coming anyway, voice messages piling up like autumn leaves that I had no intention of raking. David's voice getting more panicked with each message. Keisha trying different emotional approaches, from tears to anger to bargaining. Even people I barely knew from church were calling to offer their opinions about family obligations and Christian forgiveness. But the message that really caught my attention came from someone I had never heard from before. A man's voice, confident and condescending, introducing himself as Marcus, Keisha's cousin, who worked in social services. "Mrs. Jenkins, this is Marcus Washington calling about the situation with David and Keisha. Look, I don't know you personally, but Keisha asked me to reach out because she's worried about your mental state. As someone who works with elderly people experiencing financial confusion, I think you should know that making sudden drastic changes to family financial arrangements can be a sign of cognitive decline. There are resources available to help families navigate these situations, and sometimes legal intervention becomes necessary to protect everyone involved. There it was, the real threat hiding behind all the emotional manipulation and fake concern. If I didn't give in to their demands voluntarily, they were prepared to try having me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own finances. The audacity was breathtaking. After 9 years of me working overtime shifts to subsidize their lifestyle choices, after me paying their bills while they posted expensive restaurant meals on social media, they were now suggesting that protecting my own money was evidence of mental illness. That evening, I sat in my living room and did something I hadn't done in years. I calculated exactly how much money I had spent on David and Keisha since Marcus died. Not just the big obvious amounts like rent payments and car down payments, but all the smaller purchases that added up over time. The grocery money when they claimed they couldn't afford food, the utility payments when they said the power was about to be cut off, the gas money, the insurance payments, the medical copays, the emergency vet bills for their dog. The total was devastating, $94,000 over 9 years. Almost $95,000 that represented more than half of my entire retirement savings, more than what many people earned in 2 full years of working 40-hour weeks. But the most painful part wasn't even the amount of money I had lost. It was realizing that in exchange for those $94,000 I had received mockery, indifference, and treatment, like I was an obligation instead of a blessing in their lives. As I stared at those numbers written on paper in my own handwriting, I felt something shift inside my chest that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hurt. It was something cleaner and more powerful than either of those emotions. It was absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. The next morning, I woke up with an energy and sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was Tuesday, and for the first time in a long time, I had plans that didn't involve solving anybody else's financial emergencies or wondering how much money I needed to set aside for the next manufactured crisis. First, I called the law firm where I had my will drafted 5 years ago. The secretary told me that Mr. Coleman had a cancellation and could see me that same afternoon at 1:30. Perfect timing. Then I called my bank and requested an appointment with the branch manager to review all my accounts and implement some additional security measures. I wanted to make absolutely certain that David and Keisha had no access to any information about my finances, and I needed to document everything in case their threats about legal action turned out to be more than just intimidation tactics. As I was getting dressed to leave for these appointments, my doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it might be David and Keisha coming back for round 2 of yesterday's door-pounding drama. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Beverly standing on my front porch holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. Beverly was a 58-year-old retired nurse who had been widowed about 3 years ago, and we occasionally chatted over the fence that separated our backyards. She had never formally visited my house before, so I was curious about what brought her to my door. "Good morning, Dorothy," she said with a warm smile when I opened the door. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I heard a lot of shouting and commotion over here yesterday afternoon, and I wanted to make sure you were okay. I also brought you some of my famous banana pudding because I know you've been going through a tough time lately." I invited her in and made us both some coffee. It was refreshing to have someone in my house who wasn't there to ask for money, demand explanations, or try to manipulate me emotionally into doing something against my own best interests. "Is everything all right with you?" she asked with genuine concern in her voice. "Yesterday I saw David and that wife of his over here for hours pounding on your door and yelling loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. I was seriously about to call the police if it went on much longer." I told her the whole story, not every intimate detail, but enough for her to understand what had been happening in my family for the past 9 years. Beverly listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding with expressions of understanding and recognition. "Dorothy," she said when I finished explaining the situation. "I have to confess something to you. For years, I've watched how they treat you when they come to visit. I've seen them pull up in expensive cars wearing designer clothes, talking on the latest iPhones, and carrying shopping bags from stores I can't afford to walk into. Meanwhile, you're still driving that same Honda from 2010 and shopping at Walmart with coupons you clip from the Sunday paper." Her words hit me hard because it was external confirmation of something I had been trying to deny to myself for years. Other people could see the obvious financial imbalance that I had been refusing to acknowledge. "But what has struck me the most," Beverly continued, "is that I've never once seen them do anything for you. I've never seen them help you carry your groceries, fix anything around your house, bring you meals when you were sick, or simply visit you just to spend time together without needing something expensive in return." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "To someone looking from the outside with fresh eyes, yes. But I completely understand why you couldn't see it clearly yourself. When you're a mother, you always want to believe the best about your children. You want to think they love and appreciate you, even when their actions suggest otherwise." Beverly stayed for another hour, and our conversation was the most honest and liberating discussion I had had in months. She told me about her own experiences with adult children who expected her to solve all their problems, and how she had learned to set firm boundaries after her husband died and left her with limited resources. "You know what helped me the most," she said before getting ready to leave, "realizing that being a good mother doesn't mean being a financial martyr. You can love your children deeply without sacrificing your own dignity and security for them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force them to grow up and become truly independent." Her words echoed in my mind all the way to the bank and then to the lawyer's office. In the bank manager's office, we reviewed all my accounts and implemented new security protocols. I changed all passwords again, added two-factor authentication to everything, and made sure that only I had access to any financial information about my accounts. "Mrs. Jenkins," the manager said as he processed these changes, "may I ask what prompted these security upgrades? Do you have specific concerns about unauthorized access to your accounts?" "Let's just say I finally realized that my biggest financial security risk was living in my own family," I replied. The manager nodded with complete understanding. "It's unfortunately more common than you might think, ma'am. We see many cases of older adults being taken advantage of financially by relatives who should be protecting them instead. You absolutely did the right thing by securing your assets." At the lawyer's office, Mr. Coleman reviewed my current will and listened carefully as I explained why I wanted to make significant changes to my estate planning. "Mrs. Jenkins Guz," he said after I finished detailing the $94,000 in documented financial abuse, "cases like yours are becoming increasingly common. Adult children who never learned financial independence often see their parents' retirement savings as an inheritance they can access early and frequently." I told him I wanted to restructure my will to reflect my real values instead of my fears and misplaced guilt. 50% to charities that actually help people in genuine need, not capable adults who simply choose not to budget responsibly. 30% to my sister Lorraine, who had always been financially independent and had never asked me for a single dollar in her entire life. And for David, I paused before continuing. "For David, I want to leave just enough to show that I haven't disinherited him out of spite, but not enough for him to continue avoiding adult responsibilities. 20% with the condition that he can only receive his inheritance if he demonstrates 1 full year of complete financial independence without any help from family members." Mr. Coleman smiled slightly. "That's actually a very wise approach. You're essentially creating an incentive for the personal growth and maturity that should have happened years ago." I left the law firm that day feeling a satisfaction deeper than anything I had experienced in recent memory. For the first time in 9 years, I had made important decisions about my future that reflected my genuine values and priorities, not my fears or my misguided sense of maternal obligation. That evening, as I sat down to prepare dinner for myself for the first time in months, without the constant anxiety of waiting for phone calls asking for money, I realized something important. I didn't feel guilty. My whole adult life, I had been programmed to feel guilty whenever I didn't immediately meet the needs of others, especially my family members. But this time, that familiar crushing guilt was completely absent. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: mental clarity. It was like I had been living in an emotional fog for nearly a decade and could finally see clearly again. Beverly had mentioned during our coffee conversation that there was a 5-day cruise leaving from Savannah next Wednesday, and she had an extra cabin because her sister had to cancel due to health problems. "Would you be interested in coming with me, Dorothy? When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" The idea excited me immediately. When was the last time I had traveled anywhere for pure pleasure? When had I last slept in a bed that wasn't my own, eaten at a restaurant without calculating how much it cost, or simply relaxed without the constant background anxiety about David's next financial crisis? "I would absolutely love that," I replied without hesitation. That afternoon, we booked the cruise together, $200 per person for 5 days, all meals included. It was a fraction of what I had spent on David and Keisha's last vacation to Miami, but this time every penny would be for my own enjoyment and peace of mind. Wednesday morning arrived faster than I expected. As I was loading my suitcase into Beverly's car, I felt something I couldn't quite identify at first. It took me a few minutes to recognize the feeling because it had been so long since I had experienced it. Pure excitement about my own future. The cruise was absolutely transformative. 5 days of waking up whenever I wanted, eating whatever appealed to me, and participating in activities simply because they brought me joy. Beverly turned out to be the perfect travel companion, independent, funny, and completely free from any family drama or financial manipulation. On the ship, I met other women around my age who had been through remarkably similar experiences. During one dinner at the captain's table, a woman named Patricia told me how her 2 adult sons had completely drained her 401k retirement account before she finally said enough was enough. Another woman, Carolyn, discovered that her daughter had been using her credit card to fund a gambling addiction for over 2 years. "What surprised me the most," Carolyn said, as we watched dolphins swimming alongside our ship, was realizing that I wasn't alone in this situation. I thought financial abuse from adult children was something that only happened to me because I was too weak to say no. But it turned out there was practically an entire generation of parents who had never learned how to establish healthy financial boundaries with our grown children. We had been so focused on being loving and supportive that we had accidentally enabled dependency and irresponsibility instead of growth and maturity. When I returned home on Sunday evening, I felt like a completely different person than the woman who had left Atlanta 5 days earlier. 5 days without a single phone call asking for money. 5 days without financial anxiety or guilt about saying no to unreasonable requests. 5 days without the constant mental burden of solving other people's problems and managing their poor decisions. It was like remembering who I actually was before I became the family bank. There were several messages waiting on my answering machine, but to my surprise, none of them were desperate demands for financial rescue. David had called twice, simply asking if I had gotten home safely from my trip. Keisha had left one short message saying she hoped I had enjoyed my vacation and that they would love to hear about my experiences when I had time. The tone was completely different from the angry, demanding voices I had been hearing for the past 2 weeks. On Monday morning, Beverly came over with coffee and homemade biscuits to hear all the details about the cruise experience. As we sat on my back porch chatting and laughing, I saw David's Lexus pull slowly into my driveway. But this time, instead of jumping out immediately and marching to my front door like he owned the place, he sat in the car for several long minutes. When he finally rang my doorbell, his whole demeanor seemed different. He looked nervous, but also somehow more mature than I had seen him in years. "Mama," he said when I opened the door, "I know you just got back from your cruise, but could we talk for a few minutes? Without any drama, without any demands, just you and me having an honest conversation." I invited him into my living room. Beverly discreetly excused herself and went back to her house, sensing that this was a family moment that needed privacy. "Mama, I wanted to tell you what Keisha and I have been doing these past 2 weeks," David began, and his voice sounded different than it had in years. more serious, more thoughtful, less entitled. We moved out of that expensive apartment in Buckhead. We're renting a smaller place in East Atlanta that costs $400 less per month. It's not as fancy, and it's definitely not in the kind of neighborhood Keisha used to post about on Instagram, but we can actually afford it with just our own salaries. How do you feel about the change? I asked, genuinely curious about his answer. Honestly, it was hard at first, he admitted. The apartment is smaller, there's no granite countertops or stainless steel appliances. The neighborhood doesn't have the same status that Keisha was used to showing off to her friends. But after living there for a week, I realized something important that I had never understood before. What was that? That I can actually sleep peacefully at night, knowing that we're paying for everything ourselves. I don't have that constant anxiety in the back of my mind about how we're going to cover next month's rent, or wondering which bill is going to come due that we can't afford, or trying to figure out how to ask you for money without sounding desperate. It was the first time I had ever heard David acknowledge that their lifestyle had been causing him stress and anxiety. It had never occurred to me that he might have been carrying guilt and worry about their financial irresponsibility. We also canceled those expensive gym memberships at LA Fitness and signed up at Planet Fitness instead, he continued. It costs less than half as much, and honestly, the equipment is just as good. Keisha found a part-time job working weekends at a beauty supply store to bring in some extra income. And get this, Mama, it was her idea. She said she wanted to contribute more actively to our household finances, instead of just managing money that came from other people. I was genuinely surprised to hear that Keisha had taken that kind of initiative. For years, she had seemed to view working additional hours as beneath her, especially since they could always count on me to cover any budget shortfalls. Mama, I also want to apologize to you formally, not just for what happened 2 weeks ago at that brunch, but for all these years of treating you like a personal ATM instead of my mother who deserves respect and gratitude. What made you finally realize what was happening? I asked him directly. When Keisha and I had to sit down and create our first real budget using only our actual income, I realized that I had no idea what it really cost to live as an adult. My entire adult life since college, I had been living way beyond our means because you were always there to cover the difference between what we earned and what we spent. David paused and looked me directly in the eyes with more sincerity than I had seen from him since he was a teenager. Mama, I want you to know that these past 2 weeks have been the first time in years that I truly feel like a grown man instead of someone pretending to be an adult while his mama pays the real bills. And how does that feel? I asked. Terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. I didn't realize how much psychological weight I was carrying around until I got rid of it. Weight. I was curious what he meant by that. The weight of knowing deep down that I wasn't really independent. The weight of knowing that our whole lifestyle was basically a financial lie. The weight of knowing that I was taking advantage of my own mother's generosity and love, but being too selfish and immature to stop myself. Those words hit me harder than anything else he could have said. For years, I had thought that I was the only person suffering in our dysfunctional financial relationship, but it turned out that David had also been carrying shame and anxiety about their dependence on me. Mama, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that's happened, but there's something I would like to request from you. My body tensed up automatically, expecting another financial request disguised as family reconciliation. Tell me what it is, I said carefully. Do you think we could ever have a normal mother and son relationship? The kind of relationship where I visit you on Sundays because I love spending time with you, not because I need something expensive. Where we can sit on your porch and talk about life and family and church without money being part of the conversation. The question moved me because it showed that he understood the difference between genuine family connection and transactional relationships based on financial dependency. David, that kind of relationship can start right now if you really want it, I told him. I have always wanted to have a son who visits me because he enjoys my company, not because I'm useful to him financially. So would it be okay if Keisha and I came over this Sunday for dinner? We'll bring all the food, we'll cook everything ourselves, and we'll clean up afterward. We just want to spend time with our family without any agenda or ulterior motives. I would love that more than you know. After David left that afternoon, I sat in my living room, reflecting on everything that had changed in just 3 short weeks. I had lost my role as the family's financial rescue service, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable: my self-respect and the possibility of having authentic relationships with my son and daughter-in-law. That evening, I called Mr. Coleman to ask about modifying my will one more time. After this conversation with David, I wanted to consider a different approach to my estate planning. Instead of punishing him permanently for past mistakes, I decided to create a structure that would reward demonstrated maturity and financial responsibility over time. "Mrs. Jenkins," the lawyer said when I explained my new thinking, "you're essentially creating what we call a performance-based inheritance. It's designed to encourage long-term personal growth rather than simply penalizing past behavior." "Exactly," I replied. "If David can demonstrate real financial independence for 2 consecutive years, he could earn a larger portion of the inheritance. If he maintains that independence and responsibility for 5 years, he could earn an even larger share. But if he falls back into his old patterns of financial irresponsibility, we revert to the original plan with strict limitations." "It's actually a very intelligent approach to estate planning," Mr. Coleman said. "You're creating incentives for the kind of personal development and maturity that benefits everyone involved." As I hung up the phone that evening, I realized that for the first time in nearly a decade, I was making plans for my future based on hope instead of fear. Hope that my son had truly learned important lessons about independence and responsibility. Hope that our family relationships could heal and grow stronger. Hope that my final years would be lived with dignity, respect, and genuine love, instead of financial manipulation disguised as family obligation. I walked out to my back porch and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening Atlanta sky. In the distance, I could hear the gentle sound of the small water fountain I had installed in my garden last spring. It was a modest luxury I had allowed myself after years of questioning whether I deserved to spend money on my own happiness and peace of mind. Now I knew the answer to that question. I had always deserved to treat myself with the same generous spirit I had shown to others for so many years. It had taken me 63 years to learn that lesson, but I had finally learned it and would never forget it again. 3 months later, David and Keisha came for Sunday dinner every single week without fail. They brought groceries, cooked meals, helped with household chores, and most importantly, they never once asked me for money. Our conversations were about life, family, church, and dreams for the future, instead of financial emergencies and budget shortfalls. Keisha got promoted to assistant manager at the beauty supply store. David received a raise at his marketing job after proving he could focus on work instead of constantly worrying about money. They were saving up to buy their first house with their own down payment, and they talked about their goals with pride instead of expecting me to fund their dreams. For my 64th birthday, they surprised me with a weekend trip to Tybee Island that they had saved for and planned entirely on their own. We walked on the beach, ate fresh seafood, and talked about Marcus and the memories we all shared. It was the first family vacation I had been invited to in over a decade. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never found the courage to set those boundaries. Would David and Keisha have ever learned to stand on their own feet? Would I have died broke and bitter, having given away my security for people who never truly appreciated my sacrifice? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and I'm grateful I don't have to find out. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling. True family bonds aren't built on financial dependency, but on mutual respect and genuine care. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for everyone's growth and dignity.